What factors? Well, lack of security, conditional love, isolation, being told I wasn't worthy of love by anyone because I hadn't earned it. And that was Jesus too. I wasn't allowed to sing yes, Jesus loves me anymore because I didn't know if he did. And I was told repeatedly I didn't know if he did. Being told that I was less than because I was creative and I was expressive, being reprimanded because I questioned everything, that my intelligence was a threat, told that my trusting and loving nature was going to be my downfall and that would lead me directly to the world and the path, the worldly path. And yet they kept telling me that I was never meek enough. I was never of service enough. I never believed enough. And that when I was questioning things, I was faithless. I needed to build a better relationship with Jehovah, and this was as a inquisitive child. As a kid grows up and they question things, and I don't know. I remember, you weren't allowed to move enough. You weren't allowed to express anything. Like in the meetings, especially, you couldn't move your feet. You couldn't twiddle. You couldn't adjust yourself. You were expected to be silent. Even infants, if the baby cried, you had to take him out right away. I remember several of my friends throwing up in their book bags because they were too afraid to tell their parents that they weren't feeling good and they needed to go to the bathroom. There was always those fears. I think being told that the family and friends that I knew, classmates that I had clung to for so long for love and affection, and first off, to lose them to the religion because my family, that blood relatives, I couldn't spend time with them because I was, they were worldly and they were non-believers, and I couldn't spend time with other family members that understood my creativity or anything. Being told that if somebody said I had maybe a chance to be a model, or if somebody said that I could sing, or if somebody said that I had any kind of talent, I was immediately shut down because it was held as a guilt. It wasn't something to be proud of. It was something to be guilty of because now I had to earn my way into paradise again because now this person said something kind about me, and how dare they? I'm not allowed to feel any of that. Um, I remember going to bed at night one time, just so scared that Armageddon was going to come like a thief in the night. I'll never forget that, a thief in the night. And I was afraid I'd be erased. I was terrified that I would be erased. And I knew that I wasn't good enough to survive it. I wasn't going to survive it. I remember waking up afraid that sometime during the day I'd look over my shoulder and see the images of Armageddon coming. And again, knowing that terror in the atmosphere was going to erase me forever because I hadn't earned it. I hadn't earned my way into paradise. I hadn't earned it. And I remember trying to figure out what to do, find ways to earn my way into paradise. And I was 7 in that memory. I was 7. And I remember my first thought of suicide, even though it wasn't the actual, well, I guess it was. I'm coming to realize that it was an act of attempted suicide. But I remember we were studying the book of Revelation, and I was absolutely terrified. I knew that I wasn't worthy. I knew I wasn't going to make it. I knew I wasn't going to make it into the new world. I knew I would not survive. And that fear was torture. And continually watching the atmosphere to see if there's any changes. God. That was agony. It was agony. And I had made the choice that I was going to starve myself, because it was kind of the only thing that I had even the slightest bit of control over. And so little by little, I just decided I was going to starve myself to death because I wanted relief. I wanted relief from that fear. And I honestly thought that the nothingness of death, being erased from existence, the nothingness, I thought it would give me peace. I was 10. There were a lot of times in my childhood I remember getting overwhelmed, and I would almost beg and pray for illness because it'd give me a respite. And if I didn't get sick, I would find little ways of hurting myself, my ankle or my wrist, things that couldn't quite be proven, just so I could get a small break from the stress, just get a little reprieve, Man, I remember in the Kingdom Hall, I remember like zero sound, zero sound. It was a touch, the parents, they'd give a horrible look or smack you or hit you or kick you underneath, to get your attention. But you couldn't move, you couldn't fidget, you couldn't be a kid, you couldn't do any of those things. And I just remember when I got older and it was time to go up and give the little talks, the little skits that we would do. I remember praying and praying and praying that I wouldn't make any noise getting up on the stage, because in the silence it would be heard. And I felt like that was one more thing that I would have to earn back, because I was making noise getting up on the stage and calling attention to myself. So, yeah, even those moments, you'd have the occasional cough. I often, wondered if they got spoke to. I don't know. I wonder if COVID makes any difference with them now, if the cough is, I don't know. My isolation from my parents didn't begin immediately, though. Right after my disassociation, I ended up getting disassociated at 16. I was in college at the time, and that wasn't allowed. And there were so many things. There's so many things, and I didn't even get baptized for myself. That's the ironic thing, is I didn't even get baptized for myself. My parents were going through a real rough spot, and I thought if I took my sister to the meetings and if I got baptized and I went to the meetings, that maybe they'd go back to the meetings and maybe there'd be some kind of peace, because it is the only safety net I felt was at that Kingdom Hall and with those people that were also in this cult, that even then I had begun to suspect, And so me getting me disassociating, it wasn't even a big deal to me because I didn't believe in it. But later on it did. And my parents were kind of like partially in, but mostly out at the time. My dad even told me the day I got baptized that he wished he could be happy for me, but he didn't believe it, And then it wasn't until many, many years later that they found their way back into the cult. And that's kind of when my disassociation became an issue. And there were some family things going on behind the scenes, there was a lot. So then the shunning began, and they didn't even try to save their grandchildren, my babies and my family. They didn't even have a second thought about them at that point, um, they just shunned across the board. They didn't think about them and fighting for them to save them, which I thought, is everything I've been taught just a lie, And I think that was the last straw, being so isolated and so programmed by these people that to this day people tell me that my very nature uh, proves to them that I was raised as a JW because of how I have to earn everything. I can't sit still. I have to constantly be earning their approval or their love, or I don't know. But because of all that programming, I was terrified of everything. I was terrified of churches. I was terrified of school. I was terrified of living in the world. And I wanted to be out in the world, and I liked the world, but I ended up in a relationship where I ended up more isolated than not after I was disassociated. And so, my parents were still what I clung to, and so they were still kind of my world until they finally shunned me for the final time. And my final suicide attempt was right after my mom she handed me $200, and she told me that I was dead to them and that my children were dead to them and all the people that I loved were dead to me. And because I got baptized, because I thought that that's what they needed, and I didn't even believe in it. I just went through the motions. And now, because I was baptized and put on the spot to be disassociated, I can no longer spend time with my parents. And my entire life went dark, and I couldn't even see my kids. I couldn't see any of it. It wasn't until during the attempt I remembered my kids. And I walked to a safe place and I asked for help. And I swore that was the last time that cult was going to make me feel like that again. But they did. My dad passed, and I found out by accident. I wasn't supposed to know, but I found out accidentally. And then 5 months later, my mom died. And I was completely erased. My children were completely erased from their lives, even in the little pamphlets, in their obituaries. And I thought that was I thought that was worse than death. And I realized that their version of hell, it's one they create through their shunning, through their isolation,
through their disfellowshipping and disassociation, through their rules and their laws. I don't see how that they don't realize what they do to people, what they do to their lives, and all these rules changing now. What did that do for everybody else? And it doesn't make any difference to me because my parents both died before I could even try to work this out with them. Explain to them why I feel the way I do. Have that closure. But I survived. I didn't. I survived suicide. And I survived that cult.